Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Now I think I could say we've straightened out the technical problems. It's been a tough week technically around here. Thanks for bearing up with us. It wasn't Jimmy's problem, it was ours, but we're happy to have you here, Jimmy.
I'm glad to be here.
Well, hey, Jimmy, before I go back to the phones, and I will go back to the phones shortly.
Good.
Will you tell me what's dropping on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World tomorrow?
Yeah, we're going to be looking at distressing near-death experiences. So these are cases where people have had a near-death experience. Let's say they go into cardiac arrest or otherwise, and they don't have the everything's rosy on the other side experience. They have one that contains disturbing elements, and so it turns out these are way more common than near-death experience researchers initially realized. They account for something like a fifth of near-death experiences, and that could well be an underestimate. And so we're going to be talking about them and what they do and don't imply.
All right. Okay, that's tomorrow on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Emma is in Hayden, Idaho, watching on YouTube. Emma, always glad when you call. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hi, so I'm going to reveal something about myself that's really embarrassing. Mm-hmm. I have a mental illness and I hear voices. 95% of my mental illness is completely under control with medication. Mm-hmm. But I struggle. There's two things that just drive me crazy where I hear voices. Number one is silence, and the other one is white noise. So when I do my devotions in the morning, I can take about 10, 15 minutes, and then I have to get up and walk around, and it's a big struggle for me. And I was just wondering, how would you tackle this, Jimmy? I know you're not a doctor or anything like that, but I've taken medication for it before, and it's worked, but it only lasts for a short period of time.
Okay. Let me ask a follow-up question that will help me potentially. Do these voices what do these voices tend to say? Are they talking to you directly? Are they telling you anything? Or are they is it just like you're overhearing a conversation?
Mostly I'm overhearing a conversation, but they can get really condescending if I'm in a bad place.
Okay. Well, the first thing I'd say, now, obviously I'm not a doctor or a psychologist, so I can't, give you medical advice, but I am aware that not all cases of voices are distressing to people. There are people who hear voices and they're able to live with it, and it's not even always a symptom of mental illness. But and if you want more information about that, you could contact me offline, off the radio, and I can potentially point you to some resources that might be of assistance. However, in terms of just taking your question at face value, it seems to me that there are a couple of things that I would suggest. The first one is if silence and white noise tend to be situations where you experience difficulty with the voices. The first thing is, well, you might consider doing devotions in a way that doesn't involve silence. People have recorded rosaries, they have recorded chaplets of divine mercy, and maybe using a recorded devotion that would give you some audio backup for your devotion in addition to what you're doing with your own voice or your own mind, that might help. So that's a purely practical solution. Obviously, if these are due to mental illness, you want to do what you can to deal with them in terms of conventional therapy. The other thing, though, is if you find them distracting, and I would say do your best not to worry about it. When you're doing your devotions, if you have, I'd say do your best to continue with the devotion in spite of them. But I wouldn't beat yourself up if it just gets to a point and you say, I need to get up and walk around. I can't continue this devotion right now. That's okay too. So I would say, don't feel like you're in a double bind. Don't either way, go easy on yourself. If you can just relax and continue despite the voices, then that's great. And there's virtue in that. But there's no lack of virtue in saying, okay, this situation is getting to be a little much and I need to go do something else now for my own sake. That's fine too. God understands that.
That sounds great. Sounds really good.
Okay.
Especially the recorded stuff.
Yeah.
Prayer.
And there are a lot of videos on YouTube of that kind of content, and you can just search YouTube for it and just bring right up a video that you can on your phone or on your computer and pray along with it. Oh, there's also a podcast I might ought to mention called this is a little bit. This podcast is called Pray Station Portable. It's basically the Liturgy of the Hours in podcast form. There are a bunch of different files that come with it each day, and you can do whichever files you choose. So that could also be a potential audio devotional resource for you. Once again, it's called Pray Station Portable.
Oh, I love it. Thank you, Jimmy. I knew you'd have some suggestions.
No problem. Happy to be of service.
Emma, thank you very much for the call. As I said, it's always a great pleasure when you call, and I thank you very much. And I hope we'll get to speak again before too long. Every single line full, so onward we go. Cubby is in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, listening on the Catholic Answers app. Cubby, thanks for downloading the app onto your phone. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Yeah, absolutely. And Emma's just up the street from me, I guess, because I'm in Coeur d'Alene, she's in Hayden. Anyway, She's still listening. Your Amen app could be helpful also.
Okay. How can I help you, Cubby?
Question is, RCIA. I'm a faithful Catholic. Mm-hmm. I'm a faith-integrated psychotherapist, and I work with a lot of Christians, and they would like to partake of the sacraments, particularly the Eucharist, and they believe and all that. Mm-hmm. But the RCIA is just, the lengthy process is just a barrier.
Mm-hmm.
And who can give a dispensation? I'm, familiar with Scott Hahn, where I guess the priest pretty much just kind of let him into the church because he's like, more than 99% of the Catholics anyway. Is it the bishop or the priest that can say, instead of attending all the classes, if you go to Formed and watch these 6 videos, then you can come into the church? Or how does that work? Who can give the dispensation?
Okay, it's not formally a dispensation, but in terms of who can give permission for something like that, that's typically the pastor. Now, since your friends aren't yet members of a church, if they're having difficulty with one pastor, they could go to a different church. But a different Catholic church and see if the pastor there is more receptive. What I can tell you is that the national statutes for the catechumenate are the document that governs this issue in the United States. And according to the national statutes for the catechumenate, there is not supposed to be a one-size-fits-all program for coming into the church. The full RCIA program is meant for people who have not been baptized and who basically don't have any religious education. But the closer someone is to the Catholic faith, the less waiting and instruction they're supposed to go through. So, for example, if someone's coming from an Eastern Orthodox background, they're supposed to be able to be admitted very quickly. If someone's coming from a Protestant background, they'll need some additional instruction, but not a full RCIA course. And so it is supposed to be customized to the individual. Now, for practical reasons, in some parishes, they don't do that, and they kind of mainline everybody through the full RCIA program. That's really not what's supposed to happen, though. And if a parish has the resources to provide a customized program to an individual candidate for reception, then they should do that. So I would talk to the pastor and see what's possible given the situation of these individuals.
Cubby, you can probably hear the music. Thank you. 2 calls in a row from Canada, then 2 from Idaho. Go ahead, Jimmy.
One can also go to the bishop if needed.
Okay, that'll bring us right to the break. As I said, all lines full. Back with more Open Forum with Jimmy Akin right after this. Why We're Catholic is the one book you can hand to anyone to invite them into or back to the Catholic faith. With more than 400,000 copies sold, Trent Horn's book has had a #1 ranking on Amazon.com for 5 years running. Now available in softcover, bulk cases, ebook, and on Audible. Find out what the excitement is all about. Order your copies of Why We're Catholic at shop.catholic.com or at a good Catholic bookstore. Visit whywe'recatholic.com.
If you're not a Bible scholar, the full message of how the Sunday Mass readings fit together can be tough to comprehend. Apologist Carlo Broussard is here to help. Join Carlo every Friday for the Sunday Catholic Word podcast. In each episode, he unpacks the scripture readings for that Sunday and brings them all together so you can better understand and defend the faith. Visit SundayCatholicWord.com to subscribe. That's SundayCatholicWord.com.
What if the voice of your deepest doubts about Catholicism rose up in the form of a human being and challenged you to defend your most foundational beliefs? That's the task apologist Trent Horn took upon himself in his new book, Devil's Advocate, a dialogue with his own best objections against the faith that he professes and defends. You can stand up against your doubts, and Trent will show you how. Pick up your copy of Devil's Advocate today at shop.catholic.com or at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Our Lord needs articulate defenders of the truth to spread the joy of the Catholic faith. Catholic Answers monthly giving club, Society 315, helps you fulfill the call in 1 Peter 3:15 to always be prepared to make a defense for the hope that is in you. For as little as $10 a month, you'll help Catholics grow in faith, bring lapsed Catholics home, and lead non-Catholics to the truth. Go to casociety315.com and join today.
On the next More to Life, Discipleship Discipline.
Kids driving you crazy? We'll help you handle those annoying behavior problems gracefully.
That's tomorrow on More to Life. Now back to Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live, the first groovy music of 2024. Thanks for being here with us. Jimmy Akin is our guest this hour. Next hour, Mark Brumley. Both hours, open forum, and that means open to anyone. If you've got a question about the Catholic faith, 888-318-7884. And, of course, when Jimmy's here, if you've got a question about anything, you're welcome to call. Up next is Aaron in Duluth, Minnesota, listening on our website, Catholic.com. Aaron, we're glad you're here. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Very well, yes.
Awesome. So my buddy Jimmy, just finished your 365 daily defense and really enjoyed it, so thank you for that.
Oh, great.
My question, yeah, and so now I'm on to C.S. Lewis's book on miracles, entitled Miracles, and it sort of prompted a question. We're told that Satan can make himself appear as an angel of light in 2 Corinthians, and that in 2 Thessalonians, we hear that he will use all sorts of displays of power through signs and wonders that serve that lie. And in 1 John 4, verse 1, he said, we hear that, dear friends, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. Mm-hmm. And so it kind of got me thinking, not so much what does I believe what the Catholic Church uses in their assessment of miracles. But my question is more, how does a layperson discern between what might be divine and what might be demonic? And aside from, I think there's the obvious case of some Protestants will even point to the apparitions of Mary and say that these are false miracles, if you want to call them that. I don't think the Church uses that term, but I think we look to, obviously Mary is pointing the way to Jesus, and so it seems fairly obvious that that's probably divine. But are there are we clever enough to detect those lies? I suspect the devil is spiritually strong, and so just kind of curious on your thoughts.
Well, we're clever because God gave us cleverness. We don't have as much cleverness as angels, but what we do have is God on our side. And so we can trust that in any fundamental matter, God is going to not let the devil win, because that's what God is about, not letting the devil win. Not in any fundamental sense. Now, that doesn't mean the devil can't win little victories here and there, but we can, in those situations, use the resources that God has given us. And most of the time, those resources are knowledge to figure out. Now, God can do other things. He could, let's say you've got the devil deceiving people in a given area. God could always send an apparition, or, to correct what the devil's saying. He could do a miracle to validate that apparition. Things like that could happen. But normally that doesn't. And normally what we do is we use basic knowledge of the Christian faith. There are I would say, two basic ways of discerning demonic activity. The first one involves the contradiction of the Christian faith, because one of the things the devil wants to do is deceive people about the truths of the faith. And so he wants to lead people away from love God and love your neighbor. And so one way that can happen is by promoting false moral beliefs, like, murder is a good thing. Charles Manson got sold on that one. So if the devil is contradicting what we know God has revealed about morality, that would be a sign, if something supernatural is happening, that it's demonic rather than divine in origin. Then the other way, the other component of this first way, is false doctrine, because the devil wants us to not correctly understand God. And so if a given thing is promoting the idea that Jesus isn't divine, or that he's an angel, or that there are multiple gods, or something like that, well, then if something supernatural is occurring, then it would be demonic rather than divine. The second major way of detecting demonic activity is aversion to the holy, because demons find the holy painful. For example, in cases of demonic possession, they will be, one of the symptoms of demonic possession is if the possessed person is unable to look at a picture of Mary, or unable to look at a crucifix, or they just find holy water painful, or things like that. Anything that's holy, they are averse to. And so that's one of the key diagnostic criteria in cases of possession. And so if we see things that are contradicting Catholic teaching, whether on morals or doctrine, and if we see aversion to the holy, that also could be a sign of demonic activity. But you'll notice in both cases, we also have to establish that something supernatural is happening, because sometimes it's not the devil. You can have people who are just mistaken about morality. The devil is not the only source of moral error. Classically, the three sources of temptation are the world, the flesh, and the devil. And the devil's just one of those things. So it could be the world, meaning the example set by others, that's the source of error. It could be the flesh, meaning a person's inbuilt temptations, that's the source of a moral error. Similarly, bad reasoning can lead to theological error with the devil not involved at all. And some people, without the devil's involvement, can just be averse to the holy, and so we have to establish that something supernatural is going on. We can't just say, oh, well, this is bad, therefore it must be a demon. But if you can establish that something beyond the ordinary course of nature is happening, and that it contradicts Christian teaching, or that it's averse to the holy, that would allow you to have a reasonable basis for proposing demonic activity as the explanation.
Aaron, as you heard, the lines are full, so I'm going to leave it at there. I hope that was helpful to you. John is in Texas watching on YouTube. John, thank you for your call. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hey, Mr. Aiken. I hope you're doing well to this letter. My question is, assuming a non-literal interpretation of Genesis 1 through 3 and that there was death before the fall, how would you answer someone who says, how can an all-loving God allow for billions of years of animal suffering? And in line with that, how do you interpret Romans 8:21 regarding the creation being in bondage to decay and awaiting freedom?
Okay, so the first thing I'd say is that this issue really doesn't have to do with a non-literal interpretation of Genesis 1 through 3. It never says in Genesis 1 through 3 that there was no death before the fall. What it says is God said to Adam and Eve, if you eat this fruit, then you will die. And it also indicated that Adam and Eve had access to the fruit of the tree of life, which would keep them alive. But you can take a fully literal interpretation of Genesis and think the world was created in 6 days and all that, and it just doesn't say anything here about animal death. It, in fact, implies the existence of plant death, because what else are Adam and Eve going to eat? They're going to eat plants, and those plants that they eat are going to die. So one can have a fully literal view of Genesis and still propose that and understand that that animals and plants did die before the fall. What came into the world through the fall was human death. And that was a position, for example, of St. Thomas Aquinas. And he didn't have a problem with a 6-day view of creation. So you don't have to take a non-literal view here. Having said all that, and also just to touch base, you asked about Romans 8. I think Paul's talking about human creation there. It's like when we say, all creation, I'd have to think of a more specific example, but even we can use the term creation to refer to mankind. And that's just based on what's called the universe of discourse we're talking in. I could say, all creation has heard of Jesus Christ. All mankind has heard of Jesus Christ. Not every rock and ant has heard of Jesus Christ. So I think Romans 8 is talking about human creation. When it comes to the justice of God, in regard to all this, well, faith teaches us that God would not permit an evil if he wasn't going to bring an equal or greater good out of it. And so when God permits animal suffering and animal death, just like when he permits human suffering and human death, he's going to bring out an equal or greater good. Now, that could happen in a number of ways. It could happen for the animal itself. And if you think about it, most animals, they've got a lot of good in life. They have, a long period of good. And then they typically have a death that's short and maybe painful, like if they get eaten by a predator or something, or they have a final illness. But they've got a lot more benefit out of life than they have suffering. And so for most animals, they're coming out on the plus side of the equation. And it's not like God's being unfair to them, not most animals, because they get more benefit out of life than they have pain. On the other hand, even if you let's suppose there is an animal that has more pain in life than it has good times, well, you've got a bit of a question of how God could deal with that. And a classic response would be that, well, animals don't have an afterlife, so they're not going to have it made up to them in the afterlife, but then they don't have rights. And so it's not like God is denying their rights because they don't have any. On the other hand, I think, I did an episode of Mysterious World about this. It's episode 203. So you can go to mysterious.fm/203. It's on animal afterlife. I go through the arguments that have been classically used that animals don't have an afterlife, and I don't find them convincing. I also am aware that we've actually got some evidence for animal afterlife. And so if animals have an afterlife, or at least some animals do, then God could make it up to them in the afterlife for things they suffered in this life, just like he can make it up to us for things we unjustly suffered in this life. So I think fundamentally that set of answers And I know I provided them rather quickly, but it's the radio. I'm sorry about that. I think that set of answers shows that the problem of evil as applied to animals doesn't really involve God being unjust to them.
John, it's time for the break, so I'm going to leave it there. Thank you for the call. I hope it was helpful. It's Open Forum. Jimmy Akin, our guest, right back after this.